Welcome to Truth or Raps, and actually, I think this is probably out of sync, so let's try this again. Okay, welcome to Truth or Raps. So I think there's a lot to be said for the idea of be the change you wish to see in the world. I mean, I think there's also a lot to be said for uh, having strict principles. And it's actually kind of funny because so I went to click on and watch a little bit of an episode of Stefan Molyneux, Free Domain. And this was actually a supporters episode, so I mean, I don't want to roll my eyes at the existence of supporter episodes. I think supporter episodes, are probably helpful to him. And being a supporter myself, at least for the year that I bought it for, bought into the locals community there, you know, um, it's nice to have like, oh, these are the special things. This is why you spent however much money you did for like a subscription to the platform there. And but the thing is, you can't go watch it. Maybe someday you'll be able to, but in any case, the episode is called Dune Review! Exclamation point. It was released on the 15th of March 2024, and I was interested in it because I remember in an episode not too long ago, somebody mentioned Dune, maybe the book, maybe the movie, but in any case, just the concept of it. Uh, and Stefan Molyneux, or I don't know if it was just the concept of it, but Stefan responded with saying like, "Oh, I hate Dune," and it was sort of like a little bit of a surprise because there are actually a lot of successful people who seem to point to Dune as like real big help for them in terms of the books that they read. And anyway, Stefan Molyneux had this as his Dune review episode, and it's clearly not just a Dune review. It's like one of his call-in, or not call-in shows. It's one of his shows where he does a live stream. It's one of his live streams. And so, but the thing is, he starts the episode talking about somebody brings up somebody whom, interestingly enough, I didn't know who they were, and whereas they had said something about David Goggins, and Stefan says that he doesn't know who David Goggins is, which is kind of interesting. David Goggins is probably a big enough guy in sort of kind of the spheres that Stefan Molyneux might be like looking into things in. Like Stefan knows who David Rogan. He knows who Joe Rogan is. He knows who Jordan Peterson is. I imagine he knows who. Yeah, he knows who Dave Rubin is. He's been interviewed by Dave Rubin. Like he's basically been on many of the shows and talked to many of the people that might be associated with someone like David Goggins. But in any case, I'll give you an example. So David Goggins is this guy, and actually I was sort of relieved to hear that David Goggins wasn't the guy who said this. It was said about him. But David Goggins is this guy who was in the Navy SEALs, and he's, a big push yourself to your limits kind of guy. He's a big, just keep doing it and never take a break kind of guy. And he's sort of interesting. I'd recommend checking him out. He's sort of an interesting kind of guy. But somebody had said something about how David Goggins should forgive his father for being abusive, and because like they said like, well, I wish I beat my children up more, and David Goggins, you should forgive your father. It wasn't a guy named Elliot Ness. That's the guy from the Untouchables and the Prohibition stuff, but it sounded similar enough to Elliot Ness, interestingly enough. I'm not sure what the other guy's name is. But Stefan says something about, like, well, why are you asking? He's sort of because Stefan's big subject is child abuse. Or that's one of his biggest subjects. If there were like a top three big subjects Stefan talks about, child abuse might be number one. And so he talks about how his mom was abusive to him. He talks about how child abuse is sort of the root of dysfunction later in life, and blah blah blah. And he makes a lot of good points. But the thing is, here he sort of lets this guy, whom he, not David Goggins, but the other guy, he said he did a couple of shows with him. I'm not sure what context he would have been doing shows with him in, if he refers to that guy as somebody like this, but he said, like, well, why are you expecting anything else from people who don't have, like, philosophical underpinnings or, like, philosophical standards? And it's like, all right. But then he moves on and sort of, like, without skipping a beat, he starts talking about, somebody asks a question about, like, their nephew or someone in their family or something getting a scholarship to a public university, like a full ride. Their SAT scores were good enough that they got a scholarship to a university or a college or whatever. And they, the change from college to university to reflect the more British thing in America really pisses me off, by the way, just colloquially, like people saying, oh, I went to university. It's like, no, in America you go to college, and you might go to a university, but it's referred to as generally as going to college. In Britain and maybe other places, I think it's referred to, in like Europe, I guess, it's referred to as going to university. But nowadays you hear more Americans say, I went to university, and it's like, what, are you going to go to hospital next? You know, not to a hospital, you're just going to go to hospital. You're going to go to university. It's like, in America, you tended to say, I'm going to a university, not I'm going to university. So that really annoys me. I don't like the, not that I hate British English or anything, but I don't like the sort of trend of the British English version, the stuffier sounding version being the version that Americans are now using. It's like, oh, you all want to be pretentious? You all want to sound like you're fucking John Oliver? Like, fuck you, you know? But anyway, and fuck John Oliver, by the way. Really, like, fuck that guy. But anyway, you know, John Oliver's, like, just one of many heads of the dragon, you know? It's like, he's probably not that much worse than most people, but I think John Oliver actually had a lot to do with our culture subtly changing, and without John Oliver's influence, I wonder how our culture would be right now. So, but anyway, I think it'd probably be better, what I'm saying. But either way, Stefan, he's asked a question by somebody who is saying, hey, basically this person is getting a full ride scholarship for some SAT scores to a state college, and I'm asking you if you think they should just, you know, that person should take the money and they should go to college for free, even though it's being paid for by tax dollars that were stolen from other people, or should they not take it? And Stefan Molyneux, he does one of his little, like, sort of like, his little, like, oh, I'm just befuddled that you would even ask me that. And he's like, well, you know, he's like, given that they were probably born like $1 million in debt for being born in America or whatever, you know, and like given that so much money has been taken from all the people in America, to be given some of that back is like, he uses some kind of metaphor like, oh, to be given some of that back is like somebody taking a gallon of blood from you or a pint of blood from you or something, like knocking you over and taking a pint of blood from you, and then they give you a teaspoon back, and it's like, are you gonna like accept that teaspoon of blood back, even though you had much more taken from you to begin with? And it's just, this kind of stuff is so frustrating, because it's like, Stefan, you literally just said something about why would you listen to somebody who doesn't have like philosophical foundations for their thought, or like philosophical standards, or however you phrased it. And I guess how he phrased it is sort of important. It's a shame that this is an episode that most people watching this wouldn't be able to watch, because most people watching this if anyone does watch this, they probably wouldn't be Stefan Molyneux subscribers, just because even people who know who Stefan Molyneux is, probably most of them aren't a subscriber on his platform. But in any case, however he phrased it, it's like, man, you just made you started the show on a point about how, why would you listen to somebody like this guy who's criticizing David Goggins when you know that, like, he doesn't have philosophical underpinnings really for what he's saying. And it's like, okay, so then where are your philosophical underpinnings when someone literally right after that you're responding to a question somebody had about taking money from an organization, in this case the government or a state school, taking money that has been stolen from other people and benefiting from it. It's like, Stefan, as long as everyone keeps buying into the system and taking the stolen money back out of the system, which, by the way, wasn't all from this kid in particular, it's like a full ride scholarship, of course, each penny of that probably came from like a different person, if you even can track it back in any kind of way. Each penny of that probably came from like a different person in whatever state they were in, or a different person in America. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, you've spent this much money and this is exactly what you're getting back, or this is some of what you're particularly getting back from the money that the government stolen from you. It's like, yes, they did steal the money from you, and for you to take a bunch of money to go to college on the government, so-called the government dime, it's really the dime of everyone the government steals from, not just in the country perhaps, but worldwide, but really probably just perhaps in the country, because every country steals from its own people. So it's like, but then again, it's like, well, where did this money come from, etc. I might be contradicting myself there, not to care about where it's coming from, but it's stolen money from other people. And so for you not to have the principle about that, for you to be one of the people saying they're not a statist, and by the way, recently Stefan Molyneux has sounded pretty statist, and just, he's always talking about, like, or not always, but like, he still refers to things as crimes. He referred to it as a good thing that, like, a mother and maybe even a father or stepfather or whatever would be sent to jail because their son supposedly did one of those school tooting events. Like, it's like, Stefan, you're like a non-statist guy, and yet you're saying it's a good thing that the state is punishing people who didn't even do a given crime for something, and you're using the word crime, which, I think the word crime is specifically from the state meaning of it. Otherwise, it would just be an immorality or something. Like, a crime is a crime against, I guess you could say it's a crime against natural law or a crime against morality. But generally, the word crime sounds to me to be like a crime against the state. And he uses, like, the term criminal or crime. He, it just seems like he's not that much an anti-statist as he used to be, and he'll say something like, well, this is, you'd probably have to watch or listen to a lot of his recent stuff to get a sense of this, but it really does seem like he's not a statist anymore. Like, he capitulates enough to state power these days in maybe even subtle ways, or maybe even less subtle ways. Like, again, saying it was a good idea for them to punish this woman. It's like, so it's a good idea for the state to punish people, Stefan? And I imagine he said, well, it's in a state system, so why are you going to be splitting hairs? Somebody's getting punished for something, whether they get punished by the state or punished by people in a stateless society, like, etc. And it's like, it doesn't seem like he's very consistent with his own stated ideology about things. And so it doesn't seem like he's very consistent here. It's like, well, it's state money. It's like the state's taking money from you. Take some money back from the state if they're offering you a full ride scholarship. And it's like, Stefan, if everyone just took money back from the state, then the world would be exactly as it is.